little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our chair and panelists. So the conversation today will be recorded, so your mics and videos have been turned off. Please use the Q&A function for any questions that you have throughout. If you have any technical difficulties, our tech host Eve Allen is on hand to help resolve them. So please use the chat function to flag any issues and select to panelists. Otherwise, messages will be defaulted to all attendees. If you would like to see the captioning, it's at the bottom right of your screen. You will see a subtitles button next to the share screen. Please use this to view the captions and/or transcript. Socials, yes, please join the conversation on your preferred social channels using hashtag #SeasonForChange. So I am, as I've said, I'm so delighted and really excited to introduce our chair and panelists for today. Thimali Kodikara is chairing, and she's also guest curated this session. Thimali is series producer and co-host of the groundbreaking podcast Mothers of Invention on feminist solutions to the climate crisis. With humour and creative storytelling, Thimali co-hosts the show alongside former Irish President Mary Robinson and comedian Maeve Higgins, curating a thoughtful and strategic lineup of guests from every continent and context. Since leading the show as a non-profit funded project crewed exclusively by women and people of colour, yay, and fueled by social justice impact strategy, Mothers of Invention has frequently been recognised as one of the top 3 climate podcasts in circulation and has maintained a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts since 2019. Thimali has also negotiated cultural and justice partnerships with allies as diverse as 350.org to Stella McCartney, as well as the American Museum of Natural History in New York, where she co-hosted their 5th anniversary celebrations of the Paris Agreement, and also the Sanders Institute, having interviewed Senator Bernie Sanders days after President Biden won the US election. Wow, I just think that's amazing. She has advised global climate organizations on how to adopt intersectionally feminist principles in their communication strategies. And she has been invited to speak at the Berlin Human Rights Film Festival, Original Thinkers Festival in Telluride, and judge Earth X Film Festival 2020, where she awarded Best Film to My Octopus Teacher, its first major prize. I absolutely love that film, as I'm sure many people here did as well. Thimali is a graduate of Central St Martin's College of Art and Design in London and has lived in New York City for 17 years. So welcome, Thimali. On our panel, we have Lael Camargo, is a cultural strategist, land steward, filmmaker and artist. They are a descendant of the Yaku tribe and Mayo tribes of the Sonoran Desert. Lael is transgender and non-binary person. They graduated from UC Santa Cruz with dual degrees in feminist studies and legal studies. Lael was the impact producer for the North Pole Show Season 2 with executive producer Rosario Dawson. They currently produce and host Did We Go Too Far, a podcast with an ecological justice organisation, Movement Generation. As the Ecological Arts and Cultural Manager at the Centre for Cultural Power, they created alongside Fabiana Rodriguez Climate Woke, a national campaign to centre BIPOC voices in climate justice. Due to wanting to shape a new world, they co-founded Shelterwood Collective, a land-based organisation that teaches land stewardship, creative envisioning, and healing for long-term survival. Lael was a transformative justice practitioner for 6 years and still finds ways to bring their lessons in alternatives to the carceral system to all their work. Most recently, Lael was named on the GRIST 2020 Fixers list, as well as celebrated by Yerba Buena Centre of the Arts list of people to watch out for in 2019. Our other panellist is Richa Upadhyay, and she is Portfolio Manager for India at Clean Air Fund and joins us from Delhi. Reacher has overseen many successful air quality campaigns, including the hashtag My Right to Breathe campaign in Delhi, 100% UP campaign in Uttar Pradesh, and the 100% Bihar campaign on promotions of renewable energy. Reacher has 12 years background in program development and management as part of the Asia Foundation and the United Nations. At the UN, based in New York, Geneva, South Sudan, and New Delhi, she ran programs on conflict and disaster prevention, developing and implementing global advocacy campaigns like Stop Rape Now and 1 Billion Rising. As well as working directly in air quality, she has developed campaigns for many relevant fields, including human rights and labour rights, women and gender equality, and child protection. She is also a founding partner of a film production company in Delhi called Jamun. What an amazing group of people we have here. I'm now going to hand over to Thimali to start the discussion.
Thanks, Emma. We've actually got Majid here too now. Thank goodness.
Majid is here.
Yeah, I will let you do the honors of doing his bio, actually.
I will.
Yeah, I will let you do
Majid.
that.
Oh, we're so pleased you're here. Thank you for joining us. Majid is a Somali-British race and climate justice activist, organiser and author who came to the UK as a refugee aged 5. He is founder and director of Union of Justice. He was a member of the European Parliament representing Yorkshire and the Humber, and mayor of his beloved city, Sheffield, and was also an elected councillor representing his community. He sits on the board of trustees for the think tank Friends of Europe and is co-chair of refugee charity City of Sanctuary Sheffield. Majid was also named one of Time's 100 Rising Stars, shaping the future of the world. Wow. And Majid is also a custard connoisseur. Brilliant to have you here, Majid.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much. I feel like it's swaddled by all these beautiful faces in front of me. I am indeed Thimali Kodikara, and I'm addressing you all today from the Lenape, Nyack, and Canarsie lands, since occupied and renamed Brooklyn, New York. And 2 years ago, when I started working on Mothers of Invention, I barely knew a thing about the climate crisis. Luckily, I'm pretty smart and I caught up, else you'd all be listening to some pretty strange content about now. But my areas of concern were always racial justice, intersectional feminism, immigrant rights. And actually at the time I was volunteering with an organization that was helping folks coming across the border from Central America, where I was hearing firsthand stories about lack of safe shelter and farms being depleted and subsequent gang violence. But still in my mind, climate change was a white people's issue. It belonged to hippies and environmentalists, and yes, for sure, scientists too, but I did not get how it related to me at all, because the media, climate advocates and politicians were still describing it as something that was going to happen to us in the global north in the future, not something that had already been occurring for generations all over the world. But right after my first taping with Mary Robinson, she explained to me that the climate crisis is the existential crisis that will affect every single human being on Earth. And the only thing I could compare that to was colonization. European colonization left only 4 countries on the planet to self-determination. British colonization alone occupied 90% of countries on the planet at some point in history, extracting natural resources and or human labor from most of the world's landmass. And as I dug into the work and did the research, I spoke to leaders and activists all over the world. And what I concluded was this issue was always mine. And my aunt had been killed in the tsunami in 2004. Her younger sister still posts pictures of herself carrying groceries and smiling while wading through knee-deep floodwater. And so as I started to ask more questions, I got educated. And when I found like-minded communities, I realized I wasn't alone. And when right-wing groups pushed back against us, our organizing became smarter and stronger. And India, Colombia, and now Palestine just this week in a unified fight against oppressive colonial power. So I'm not exaggerating when I say the speakers that I've selected today are amongst some of my favorite community organizers on the planet right now, because they are using their creative wiles to mobilize a culture shift from within their marginalized communities. So from San Francisco, Layal Camargo; from New Delhi, Richa Upadhyay; and from Sheffield, Majid. Each of us have very different pasts, presents, and futures, which we will get into, but we are all connected by both the climate crisis and colonial hangovers. So welcome, Layal, Richa, and Majid. I'm so happy to see you guys. Oh my God. Okay, so
Yay.
bios. Yeah, happy to see you. Happy to see you. Bios are very nice and everything, but we all know that our cultural heritage and histories give a lot of specificity to our work, right? Because it's not like we're doing it in a vacuum. So I wanted to kick off by asking if each of you have like a tipping point memory while being with your family or your community that sort of catalyzed your climate environmental justice work. We'll go around. So maybe Layal first, then Richa, then Majid.
Yeah, I think I came into the climate justice world, excuse me, similarly to you, Timali, where like I didn't see myself. And I was like, well, this is kind of fun. I care about the planet, but like there's all this stuff happening and racial stuff. And for me specifically, immigration is like a big deal here in the United States with Latinx communities. And it wasn't until I spent time in Mexico with my family where I was like, we grow a lot of our food. We reuse plastic. We bring our own food. We can't afford to do to go. So why are we being impacted the most? Why is our air quality so bad? And then that's when I got really enraged. And so I think a lot of it for me, my tipping point was sitting at a dining room table in Tijuana, Baja California, which is just south of the United States border, with my aunts, and just seeing how abundant and resourceful we were with like plastic bags, with like reusable containers, buying locally, because nobody had cars, so you can't just like drive really far. We made do with what the neighborhood could provide. That I was like, yeah, we're leaders in this.
Yeah.
I'm a leader in this movement. So I made it kind of my purpose to initially make a lot of Spanish-led content, which at the time was visual art, in collaboration with other artists. So I feel like for me, it was like really looking at my family from a different eye of like, we're not actually causing this crisis, yet a lot of people that look like us are being impacted first. And Baja California is a sea level, is at threat of sea level rise. And so I think it's anticipated that by 2015, a lot of that sewage that's being spilled into the Pacific Ocean is actually going to come in to those communities, and it's going to cause a lot of public health issues.
Yeah.
So yeah,
yeah.
I'll stop
no.
there.
Yeah. No. What good start. Good start, pal. Yeah. No. The first time I ever saw a solar panel or a energy saving light bulb was in Sri Lanka, for sure. For sure. Richa, what about you?
Yeah, so my social justice background has always been in sort of feminist politics and immigration politics as well. I grew up in New York and was really involved in, after 9/11, kind of the attack on South Asian communities, and just seeing, how unjust kind of policies were on communities and families. And then after that, but very much still focused on kind of feminist politics. And then after that, when I actually, my tipping point was when I went to South Sudan and started working on conflict and post-conflict recovery. And at that point, South Sudan has just become a country. So we're all in Juba. But there were all these sort of stories of, sexual violence against women in different parts of the country. And what I started to realize was that a lot of this movement that was happening of people and of tribes in that part of the world was around trying to find water and sort of these basic necessities that people needed to live. And as more and more as the natural resources was decreasing, that movement patterns were also changing, which made communities really vulnerable to all different kinds of violence, and particularly for women who were going out and trying to get water or collect wood for their households, how vulnerable they were to sexual violence. And so that link between natural resources and human movement was starting to become very kind of apparent for me, and understanding that, climate was fueling, not just sort of, people losing homes, but it was fueling conflicts and it was fueling wars. And it had already started to do that when you start to look at, how lack of water and depleting water resources makes people move from one place to the other, and therefore, you're encroaching in other people's lands. And so the, sort of conflict kind of arising out of that. And then, of course, once I moved to Delhi, I was in one of the most polluted cities in the world, and actually when I just moved to Delhi, I wasn't even really actively working on climate or air quality. I was still very much a human rights activist, but I again started to kind of unravel what was happening with migration within India as well, what was happening with floods every single year, killing millions of people, and yet that just not being kind of looked at as climate disasters. And then, of course, understanding that the air we breathe is, is very much linked to kind of this idea of development that has been left behind after post-colonial India. And so what that means in terms of economic development, but also what that means in terms of safeguarding people's life and not having those policies, or not having that, sort of the understanding of safeguarding communities as we progress economically, because these countries are new and they're just sort of rebuilding themselves.
Right, figuring it out. Right,
exactly.
Totally. Majid, I'm so happy you're here. Are you okay, pal? I had this rumor of a fire alarm and stuff. Is everything okay?
So I had to get, but yeah, no, I'm all is good now. Thank you very much. It's just a real honor to be joining so many wonderful people. So thank you very much for the invite. I guess for me, just the earliest time I remember actually doing anything that was social action in any way was, I remember when I was like 11 years old going to the the Iraq War protest in London, which was 1 million people out there, and that was like a real.
I was there, remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, like a real kind of moment. But I guess in terms of getting really active, it was just seeing far right groups like the EDL and UKIP really come to prominence, especially in the 2014 European election. I just remember thinking to myself, with so much hatred, so much rhetoric, and everything happened, I thought, if I can at least make my small part of the world, my Sheffield, my community, that bit better, that's at least me doing something. And then that kind of led me to kind of get involved in my local council, see how decisions were being made, and just come to the conclusion that I couldn't keep on asking the wrong people to do the right thing. So I thought, what can I do? And then that kind of got me. And also just in terms of like the whole climate in general, just through conversations with my mother, basically, just because we originally come from Somalia, my mum's family traditionally camel herders, and her just basically tell me stories that like it's the severe droughts that were happening in Somalia, and which were never seen before, and then the impact that was having, forcing people to basically go to refugee camps and look for shelter elsewhere, even join militia groups like Al-Shabaab. So people were basically it just kind of was like so kind of horrific, everything that was happening. That kind of was the thing that kind of really sparked me to kind of really just investigate why this was happening, and then realizing I don't have to look too far in Somalia, even like within the UK, look at where air pollution's and mostly concentrated is mainly the black and brown communities are suffering the most from it, and all across Europe. So it was like seeing the injustices of kind of everywhere kind of thing. And of course, no doubt it's our brothers and sisters in the global south that are facing the brunt of it. But and that kind of really opened my eyes, and then it kind of just led me to kind of realize the intersection between climate and race, and then things kind of progress from there, basically.
Yeah. Oh my God, what an amazing summary of it. And actually it leads very smoothly. Appreciate you, Majid, because it leads very smoothly to my first question that I want to pose to Richa, because first of all, we have to thank you so much for being here with us from Delhi. I know that only 3 weeks ago numbers were peaking at over 28,000 cases a day. But it's amazing to hear that the numbers are dropping this week. So we all hope that your family and friends, community are all keeping safe and well. So yeah, but you wrote a fantastic piece on the connections between COVID-19 and air pollution in India. And the impact of the pandemic has been so much higher in polluted regions of the world, not just India, all over the world, where people are dealing with long-term exposure. But we also know that around 50% of air pollution linked COVID-19 deaths are specifically connected to fossil fuel use. So the health benefits for pollution reduction are very strong, but how effective have climate co-benefits been in your campaigning?
Yeah, so we know that, air pollution compromises our lives from probably the day we're conceived to the day we're born, to our early, the early childhood development, to long-term exposure that weakens our immunities and exposes us and makes us vulnerable to long-term respiratory and other diseases. And then on top of that, imagine this, virus that kind of like rolls in and it confronts, the already sort of weak health systems of countries like India, and with such deep levels of inequality in terms of access to healthcare. And what we're seeing now is, what we all feared in March 2020 was this kind of immense level of loss and breakdown of health systems in places like India. But I also want to say that, one of the reasons why India is where it is of course the health system is weak. It's it's a developing country, but it's also the complete breakdown in how India is governed currently. So as much as the health system may not be able to keep up with this onslaught of this virus, it's also the fact that the country has been very poorly governed in terms of its response.
Yeah, I mean, to follow, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No. I was just going to say, yeah, and just to answer your question in terms of, what are the climate co-benefits of addressing air quality? Of course, if we want to start to make air cleaner, we need to look at the sources of pollution, and these are sources that are, the same sources that impact climate is burning of fossil fuels. It's thermal power plants. It's and it's it's all the sources that produce carbon. And so if we start to kind of tackle these sources, we will impact climate change impact as well. So yeah, they're very intrinsically linked. And all the campaigning we've done, even in sort of rural parts of India, has been to actually link air pollution and climate. And I feel that in like many parts of the country, in sort of, India is mostly sort of an agriculture-based country. And so a lot of the people understand climate change very intrinsically. They're very much in tune with what's happening with the environment around them. They understand how climate is impacting crop growth, to when the rains are coming. Without science, really, it's it's instinct, and it's generations of kind of knowledge of the land. And so actually making that connection in places outside of cities has been easier in some sense, because people understand that the climate is changing. We are getting rains when they're not supposed to. The soil doesn't feel the same anymore. And so but air pollution as a topic actually has been harder to communicate around, just because it's really been kind of internalized as a given to development, or as a given to some of the practices around crop burning. And so breaking down how air pollution actually works and its impact has been harder than actually talking about climate in parts of India for the work that we've done. But yeah, I think the co-benefits are clear, and I think we have to talk about air pollution, and particularly the solutions around air pollution with linking to sort of climate benefits.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God. So Majid, I'm going to come to you actually, because we have a lot of things to say about the UK government this week, which we will loop back to. But you are the adopted son of a working class industry city, and not too far from you, the government dismantled several coal mines and all across the country, which we all sort of perceived as a great win for a while. But then it left thousands of coal and gas workers without work, and we're still shipping in coal from Russia and the US. And Sheffield ultimately chose to Brexit, hoping it would help their local economies, which is totally understandable. But could you help our audience understand what a just transition is and what it could do for Sheffield and other very proud working class industry cities across the UK? Because I think also in the UK, we still think that it's something that's happening elsewhere, but actually these are really critical issues that are happening at home in the UK too. We can't hear you, Majid.
Thank you. Yeah, honestly, it's a really good question, and like you said, it's around just this region of South Yorkshire, many other parts of the country. We've all had like, it's a very post-industrial city, which and had a lot of especially a lot of steel industries and all that sort of stuff. And I think one of the things that a lot of people have really been discussing, and some people are really in favor of it, or some people aren't in favor of it, is basically the whole aspect of a Green New Deal, because the counter argument to a lot of that is because it's going to take away jobs.
Oh no!
Drama! So much drama!
Oh no!
Was it a conspiracy? Did Majid get shut down? They were being too real.
Took the words out of my mouth. Oh my goodness. All right, we'll come back to Majid, because I definitely want that answer. Just transition is so important to the way we talk about justice. But Lyall, I actually wanted to follow up from his response talking about unions. I'm sure like you'll be scraping off the Trump administration, 4 years of the Trump administration off my body for the rest of my life. But one of the hundreds of utterly stupid things that he did was reverse an Obama era policy that classified bias against trans workers as a form of sexist discrimination. And thankfully, the Supreme Court just a few months ago finally ruled that banning queer and trans workers was a violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which we all know about. But a very unlikely ally through all of it were the labor unions, because a union card was often the only form of employment protection for folks. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And are we done here, or is there still more work to be done in queering labor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we live in a society where trans and gender nonconforming and are marginalized, and that they actually fit a large community of folks who are homeless, who need mental health support, who tend to fall into more clandestine labor practices. So they tend to go into sex work or unprotected work. And I feel like it was a very unusual situation where labor unions did come in to kind of back the trans and the gender nonconforming community. But it is one that's much needed, because if we do kind of create these labor protections for marginalized communities, and it doesn't stop just with trans and gender nonconforming people, we are starting to scratch away at these colonial Western perspectives and realities that we live in, which do open up the possibility for more policies and protections for sabbaticals, parental leave, better bereavement leave, better medical benefits, which do impact folks with disabilities, the elder community. And so I think that we're not done with looking at how labor unions can come in and protect workers. And when I think about queering the labor movement, I think about it from that, is looking at the human as a resource that has been extracted for, at least on this side of the planet, for 500 years due to colonial and Western dominance. And that
pretty universal, I'd say.
Pretty universal, but the time is a little different for folks. I've been thinking a lot about how like the government system's been set up by how Greco and Roman systems were set up, and I'm like, damn, this has been going on for a while.
a long time.
Majid's back.
Yeah, Majid. Welcome back, buddy.
I'm
I'll
really
finish
sorry
my
about
thought.
The entire internet went down, so I'm just using the 4G on my phone. Sincere apologies about that.
Don't worry,
No
don't worry. You're
worries.
amongst friends. No, Lyle's just finishing up their question, and we'll come back to you to return
Okay.
on the just transition.
Thank you.
And so I feel like when you have institutions like labor unions coming in to protect the rights of marginalized communities, that is something that we need to see at a larger scale. Because in order for us to really shift away from what you all were talking about, fossil fuel extraction, coal extraction, and the pollution that happens in air quality, is we really need to reshift the way that we even think about labor, that it isn't this resource that can be commodified, but it's literally people just living their lives and trying to provide for their families. And so I did this video called The Big C, where I talk about how as workers, we could be working the land. And you just talked about that, Richa, that for folks who are farmers, who work with the land, have more of a rural experience, as we label it now, they tend to notice when the air quality is changing faster, when the water seems to be rising a little bit higher than that season would allow. And it is that returning of being in right relationship with our natural ecosystem that is going to be necessary for us to be a little bit more cognizant and to adapt faster. And so when you have large labor institutions that are saying these people belong here, they must be protected. Sorry, my puppy doesn't want to be exactly where I'm at all the time.
It's all I'm down for the adventure in this whole chat here. So let's lean in. I say lean in.
The working from home and Zoom life is definitely one that is fun. And so when we start to see institutions kind of back up the humanity of people is where I think this door starts to open up, where we might be able to reclaim our labor to move towards cooperative economies, collectivizing economies, where we start to collaborate and how we're actually exchanging our labor as a resource for our livelihood in a way that we can have more say in how it's done. So maybe the folks who have the better connection with the land, the folks who do notice the changes, can start to self-govern themselves in their workplace so that we don't have to be as toxic. I have a mentor of mine, his name is Gopal Dayaneni, who, when he talks about labor and when we talk about where we need to shift, he always says, if we can't get fossil fuel extraction to stop now, let's cooperate. Let's turn it into a co-op. Let's cooperatize that industry, because then instead of having one person that dictates what's going to be done, we'll have 200, 300 people. And so that self-governing power allows for the mitigation of mass extraction that is causing the harm to the planet. So when I think about queering labor, it is everything from looking at the humanity, allowing for people to be autonomously themselves, to be protected, because I do feel that that thread does allow the possibility for us to shift how we're exchanging our labor as a resource, which is causing mass harm to ourselves, our communities, our lungs, our families, and then on the larger scale, the possibility of future generations being able to exist. And so I think I see our labor and reclaiming that and being thoughtful of what do we do from 9 to 5 and how is that being exchanged for money? How can we start to break that down in small ways and in big ways? So I feel like we're not done. And I feel like labor unions, I would like to foresee that in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be very active in talking about this idea of what labors are actually being allowed at a mass scale that is leading to the degradation of our planet. And that impacts all of us. That impacts us queer people, it impacts all of us. So however small we can start to break how we see labor now, how labor has been used against us and used as a colonial tool. Let's queer it up. Let's bring more trans people, and let's bring more queer people, and let's bring more more farmers, more land workers. Let's bring them all in, and let's have people actually be able to say what needs to happen in the labor industry, because that's going to help us survive as a mass scale.
Right. If we take care of the people who are most marginalized, we take care of everybody. Like, that is the rule. It's so true. Majid, you want to finish up your response on just transition and workers' rights to follow off from that?
Yes. Yeah, sorry. So I guess the whole aspect of like a just transition, it really seeks to like really ensure that the substantial, should we say, the benefits of a green economy transition are really shared widely, so that nobody is left behind basically when we are looking to transition to a green economy, whether that be people in South Yorkshire, countries, regions, industries, communities, workers, or consumers, basically. So I guess while a just transition really is based on environmental considerations, also really shaped by other structural changes affecting labour markets, such as globalization, labour-saving technologies, and I guess the right to shift to different services. So as of course, like now we're facing like a massive climate breakdown, we really need to kind of make sure that our government, or just governments, make sure that in any sort of climate action that they are kind of really focusing on those people who are going to be hardest hit by our kind of change. And I think a lot of that kind of really comes down to communication as well, because it's something that really kind of can seem a bit scary, different, like especially for people that have been in a certain type of industry for so long. How do we kind of retrain people? How do we, like, there's so much, I guess, questions that we need to answer. And that's the whole aspect of like where a Green New Deal comes from, that we're really kind of like, everyone seems to be, well, some people try to like kind of greenwash what a Green New Deal is basically, but it actually just comes from a radical perspective. So of course we want to kind of create and secure jobs for people. So ideally, like, we'd create millions of well-paid jobs that are secure, that are future-proof, that kind of guarantee a really decent, like a good basic income, and just basic, just good livelihoods for people. Of course, we want to like decarbonize the UK and end dependence on oil and fossil fuels. So yeah, so basically it's just a lot of changes that we're trying to make, and the whole aspect is that we don't and we can't afford for it to really work, for us to really get down to net zero, to meet anything, we have to take people with us. And we can't be like, we can't neglect people, we can't, like, so yeah, it's in everyone's interest for it to be successful, that we make sure that those who are most affected aren't left behind in every facet of any kind of climate action or solution that we're basically doing.
Oh yes, straight in there, in and out. Yes, Majid. That's perfect actually, because I want to ask Rita a little bit about that, because we'll come back to Majid, this whole idea of greenwashing. I want to talk about that a bit more with you also, but because of the apathy at government level, you know, people are taking it into their own hands and realizing that that's the only way, that's possibly the only way out of it. And Rita, you know, Modi's leadership is is really looking like the overarching crisis right now. So how are you seeing communities organizing at the state, city, and village levels even to start countering that political apathy? Like, what is that organizing looking like?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to kind of describe that level of organizing in a place like India. I think what is happening at the communities, especially those who are at the forefront of climate crisis, and they're, you know, it's the annual floods every year, the you know, the droughts that, you know, that hit the western parts of the country. It's that communities are creating their own sense of resilience in a way, because they are starting to recognize that this is not, you know, it's going to happen every year, and that reliance on the government is, you know, it's a really weak link in the whole kind of chain of what needs, you know, what needs to happen in terms of, you know, one, sort of these crises being defined as climate crises, and therefore then coming up with solutions that are, you know, long-term and sustainable. You know, Modi's politics, as you can imagine, it's a politics of populism, and it's politics of hatred. It's based on hate and division, and it's based on kind of perpetuating the, you know, the caste system by keeping lots and lots of people as down as possible, so that, you know, hate politics can take hold easily, and the fires of kind of communalism can burn faster, because people are already so down and trodden, and there's very little to hang on in terms of kind of seeing a way out of poverty and oppression. So, you know, what he's been able to do is start to sort of, you know, consolidate power around him by creating those divisions that don't allow people to name things the way they are. It doesn't allow communities to say, this is a climate crisis, and it's a climate crisis because of your policies that continue to burn fossil fuels, or your policy that don't allow industries or don't hold industries accountable so that they can transition to cleaner technology. It's your policy that, which are contradictory. On the one hand, he goes on world stage and kind of announces all these great plans of India to be, driven by renewable energy, and the next day, coal is being privatized, and kind of all the processes that makes coal a little bit cleaner, even those policies are being kind of torn apart because, it's going to make him more money, and it's going to make people around him more money. And so at this point, I'm very, I don't have an answer to how communities are organizing, because the politics of this government is not allowing communities to even see the truth. We're all in this, like, we're in layers and layers of lies that's being perpetuated by this government. And so I hope that this, the COVID crisis has kind of unveiled some of these lies for people to see how failed this government is, and that that truth and lies exist, and that there is, this is a very calculated kind of reality that's being fed to people. So it's a horrible thing that we're going through right now, but I hope that this shows us, and it sheds some light on the fact that, governments in power who don't have the interests of the people are perpetuating these, the existential crisis that we're all faced with, and that unless we have very quickly a change of power and a change of, like, political systems and, and economic systems, and very fast, we're not going to get out of this. So yeah, I think, I'm not sure how much organizing is actually happening. I think it's very much kind of mitigation and resilience for us.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the communications issue is a big one. Like, it's not a side note, because it really, we know that folks like Modi, Trump, Bolsonaro, all these folks, Boris Johnson, are all using very specific PR strategies to counter all the work that we're doing. And Lael, something I find incredibly hard as I fine-tune my arguments around climate justice is how little folks actually know about their own colonial histories, and then to be able to connect the dots themselves. And that's neither white nor global North BIPOC diaspora as well, because we're just not exposed to these histories in schools. Like, I grew up in a white middle-class English suburban town, and I didn't hear the words the British Empire come out of anyone's mouth. Like, there's nothing about colonization. So how do you find yourself strategizing around that in your communications work?
I don't know if that was like an open-ended question.
That was
or
for
if
you.
It was like,
No, it's for
okay,
you.
great. I was like, hey,
you're like, I want to take that. No, that's for you.
Well, I think like just to start off is like that ignorance, and I'll call it ignorance because it is. It's like things that we do not know. No shame around that, because I have a lot of it. It was strategic. I mean, the way that the Western empire has been able to spread globally has been a strategic way of removing certain people, certain cultures, certain histories, and that's a colonization tool. Like, you can't get to a place of having mass. We're not just talking about communities. Like, we're talking about billions of people on a planet that don't know their own history, don't know why their migratory story is actually a violent one, not this like, we're progressing and my family chose to move. It's like, no, we've all had to leave our homes because of mass extraction and because of our inability to manage our own lands. And yet we have this like progressive paint of like, we move into Western countries and First Nations, first world countries, because we want to pursue a better life. It's like, no, our livelihood was eradicated where we come from. So I think when thinking through like communications and how we mass distribute that reemergence of our history that helps us make larger connections is through the content that we produce. Social media has become a big tool and a big hindrance for a lot of us, as there's a lot of algorithms that work against BIPOC political organizations. So getting information out there is harder. I think there's some data that for the amount of progressive content that you put out, there's 6 times more right-wing information that gets brought
I didn't
to
know that
people's eyes.
statistic. That's crazy.
I learned it on The Social Dilemma, which is a documentary. And so I think that this has all been strategic, and that the best thing that we can do is do education level from the interpersonal to the mass scale. So looking at concepts of the just transition, the Green New Deal, air quality, and trying to get it and break it down to an elementary level, because a lot of our people also, we're grinding, we're like surviving. Like if you look at the mass scale of Black, Brown, Indigenous people at a global scale, we wake up to survive and we go to sleep thinking about how we're going to survive the next day. Everything from sexual violence and domestic violence to like literally class warfare, oppression, and not being able to access jobs, everything from that. And so if we want to break that, we're going to need a large amount of people power to just know how they're just being used as a pawn in a larger game of power, mass power accumulation. And that requires doing it in the most funnest and engaging and culturally competent way. And that's why I am a storyteller. That's why I care about cultural strategy. I'm usually my test, I'm going to say test dummies because that's what we call them here in the US, but it's a kind of offensive to call somebody a dummy. But like your focus group for me is always my family. So when I create something and we're in feedback,
You just call your family dummies?
I think I just did. Yeah, that's inappropriate. That's so inappropriate. Like they're very smart, brilliant people. I just talked to them about how pivotal they are in me doing this work. I put my content in front of them and I'm just like, what do you think? And so everything from like my aunties who are older to like my nephew who's like 19 and teenager. And I just try to see like, how is this information actually landing for them on a day-to-day scale? And so I think it's really important for us as organizers, as cultural workers, as people who are passionate about an issue areas to go through it with compassion and as much flexibility as possible, because the information might not be able to get to somebody that one sitting. It might take repetitive years of investment. And I think that comes easy for me as a transgender person and as a queer person, because I've had to go through years with my family of like, I'm gay. Oh, they're like, it's okay. It's going to change. And then, no, I'm still gay. Oh, you're still not over that phase. Yeah. Still gay. It's been 10 years.
Still gay. Been gay. Been gay.
Still gay, been gay. So I think I'm well positioned on the patient's front and the looking at how I can say it differently to help people understand. And I think don't ever forget, if it feels frustrating, that this is strategic. You're going up against thousands of years of strategy of getting our people to a place of not really understanding why all of a sudden their community asthma rates are so high, why all of a sudden their life expectancy is so low and people are dying of more respiratory conditions. It's like, you really need to start with making larger and larger connections and having people just see. Like, I think people who are surrounded in refinery communities, they forget that they're there. And so sometimes coming in and be like, oh, there's so many refineries there. And like, yeah, they've always been there. And then doing it again. Oh, there's so many refineries there. Like now your kid has asthma. Do you think the refineries have something to do with it? And not in a condescending way, but everybody needs that outsider to come in and burst the bubble. I do too. So yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, but I definitely have a lot of thoughts about how this has been set up.
Well, I think definitely, and kindly, there's going to be lots of links in the chat to follow along with all the work that Lael and Richa and Majid are doing. So please follow that along, because Lael's doing tons of communications work in the direction that they just expounded on. So Majid, I want to come to you though to keep on this communications tip. And then we'll do one more question with Richa, and then we'll go to Q&A, because I could do this all day. This makes me so happy. Okay, so Majid, we found out that this week that the UK government invested £3.2 billion of public money into oil and gas companies since signing the Paris Agreement. Boo. And this also has made it the biggest investor of fossil fuels in Europe. And it means obviously that UK citizens have been paying to suffer their own consequences all this time. Like, talk about, you know, counter actions to all the great work that we're doing. But it's also a very classy reveal right before the COP in November. But what is amazing is we've got 3 citizens who are taking the UK government to court. And we're seeing more and more regular people, as we said, finding creative ways to take action into their own hands. So what do you think it's going to take to trust our governments again, given all this greenwashing? We've already seen them co-opt the term Build Back Better, which came out of the Green New Deal UK folks. You know, we didn't even make as much money back as other European countries did. So it's like, it's a crazy, crazy cycle that we're in.
You know, trust is a big word. Like, I don't know if like you can associate trust with this government, with all the cronyism, all the corruption, everything that's been going on, in all honesty. So yeah, I haven't got much faith. And even like the way they've been positioning, of course, with the COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland in November, but even at a time when the whole world's focus will be on the UK, to really like, even the word, they won't even utter the word justice isn't even on any of their material, because they're not interested in justice, you see. And just coming back to what Lael was saying, in terms of just like educating, but it's education in terms of like colonialism, I just want to kind of make the point that for me, like, it's always, I guess education plays a big part in it. So for me, it's always, I would love, not that I've got any faith in this government or any government doing it, but really making the realities of imperialism and colonialism a real like compulsory part of the school curriculum, because like, as I'm sure a lot of you will agree, a lot is purposefully omitted from our classroom. So by excluding the evils of Britain, European imperialism, and along, of course, with how members of the diaspora community and immigrant communities really contribute to our countries, it kind of really robs children of the understanding of how colonial ideology was implemented to begin with, and most importantly, how it still continues to really build itself to this unfair system of power at the foundation of a kind of modern society. So I know there's lots of kind of petitions, lots of campaigns to really bring that into the school curriculum, but I haven't got, it'd be amazing. But if we just really like, just want to like really zero in on the principles, should we say, like, of a Green New Deal, right? Like, because for me, it centers mainly a lot around justice, because I guess the whole idea of a Green New Deal isn't just that we're asking for climate action, but we also want climate justice. And of course, that needs to be guided by science and along with by justice. And the core principles of justice as it relates to climate, as far as I understand it, is that the people who did the least to create the crisis, but who are at the forefront and affected it by the most, are owed something, are like creditors in this equation. And I guess the people who did the most to create the crisis, and of course there's lots of different ways of kind of calculating that. It could be the top 100 fossil fuel companies. It could literally be like, there's many ways of either way. Basically, we know who's responsible for the emissions and how they've contributed to it. And I don't know, like, there's the way we talk about like how we support the global south, or even migration in Europe. It's always some kind of noblesse oblige kind of attitude, like, oh, we'll open up our borders because, you know, we're good people, and not really kind of taking into account our role of responsibility that we have. So the thing is, even if we had the most amazing Green New Deal in the UK, and we had the best amazing European Green New Deal, it still wouldn't be enough to tackle the climate crisis. That's why it's really important that we have a global approach in everything that we do.
Yes.
So this is where like the climate reparation comes in. I always say the first step is to like immediately demand the ending of all debt repayments to the global south. So just to at least break the first link of the extractive chain.
Yeah, talk about gaslighting, right? You go and invade other people's country and then make them in debt to you for all of eternity. Like, wow.
A lot of people still say, well, colonialism ended. Fair enough, there may not be troops on the ground, but it still exists in the monetary system in so many different ways in a lot of the global south countries. So it's still definitely not ended.
So is the answer just stepping outside of government altogether and everything has to be people powered?
You know, we need everything. We need to hit it from all angles. You know, so of course we need like it's worth kind of highlighting the problems that we face didn't just come down from the heavens. They were man-made problems. So we can have good people in positions about doing good things. So of course we need to kind of beat them at the ballot box. We need to beat them on all fronts. But of course, politics isn't the only way to bring about change. A lot of people doing amazing things aren't people involved in politics. They're community activists. It's basically people that have organized. And so that's why it's like, we're not asking far right. So like, we're basically going to organize and take them back. So I think, of course, we need people power. We need and the thing is like, everybody can do something. It's not a case of like, oh, well, I can't just because I don't know enough about this. So whatever, like we've all got some degree of influence. Like, hey, listen, if you've got money, donate to so many amazing causes. Like if you're a writer, right? Basically, there's always things that we can do. But I think we can't afford to not do anything because it's like, yeah, there's so much climate migration happening around the world that can easily happen to us. We're not exempt from it, kind of thing. So it's important that we're basically looking after each other now. Basically, yes, it's politics isn't the only route, and we need to. Literally, people-powered organizing, I think, is something that we can't neglect.
I mean, when we, certainly here in New York, when COVID hit, the folks who were immediately on the ground running were mutual aid programs, were cooperatives. Thinking about when Hurricane Sandy happened, it wasn't that FEMA money showed up overnight. It was that human beings got on buses and went to New Jersey and physically took, debris out of people's homes and helped them get back on their feet again. So, Richa, Modi is still using the pandemic to advocate for cheap and dirty coal. I mean, do you want to follow up and help us close up the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that, the role of the state versus people power. I think that's a really interesting kind of unfolding of that debate happening in India right now, because the state right now is pretty much absent in how folks are kind of dealing with COVID. In fact, Modi went on TV and said, you guys just take care of each other, because he's basically like washed his hands and hasn't given one press conference or answered any questions from the people. So we see that people are organizing in the absence of the state. But the flip side of it is the state isn't kind of getting weakened by this. The state is actually, like I said, consolidating more power because of this, because of kind of the lies and the machinery of lies and oppression that it continues to push forward. So I think in terms of, sort of climate, there's this meme that used to go around of like a big sumo. And I think when we spoke last time, Thimali,
on Mothers of Invention, yeah,
that there's a big sumo and there's a baby sumo, and the baby sumo is kind of pushing up against the big sumo, and the big sumo, baby sumo is, you kind of not using plastic straws, and the baby sumo is you not sort of using plastic straws, and the big sumo is that coal company, it's PepsiCo, it's these 100 kind of fossil fuel companies that are perpetuating this global crisis. So I think we need to have some kind of perspective in terms of there is a huge and important role that the state needs to play. They need to stop supporting fossil fuel companies. They need to stop supporting extraction, and they need to ensure that equity and justice is part of climate response in especially countries like India and parts of the global south, because we are the most vulnerable to climate crisis. We are the ones where the crisis has already started to play out, and millions of people are losing their lives and livelihood and are into forced migration because of it. So I would argue that we as a people need to continuously hold state to transparency and for them to respond in a way where we're actually responding to this crisis versus keeping our heads in the sand. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I'm really angry that Modi has not been able to kind of come out and really look at this crisis as a crisis. It's the same way he's dealing with the climate crisis. It's complete contradiction and inaction.
I mean, yeah, I certainly imagine him sitting drinking sweet tea somewhere, just like, you know, getting paid to ignore problems. I mean, this has been such a beautiful conversation, and this is I'm just so proud of your work. I'm so proud of your work, because I know what's happening here is the three of you are working on a culture shift. You know, when we talk about what individual action is, it is not, as you said, you know, recycling and plastic straws and whatnot. It is a collaborative movement. And between, you know, you all three of you campaigning, putting out amazing content, you know, getting on stages and talking to people, and so beautifully and so articulately and so full rounded perspective on all of these issues. You know, I think we've all spoken about how you know, if you don't, again, include the most marginalized people in the room, you are going to end up with half-baked solutions to everything. And that's why this conversation has been so important. So I'm seeing Emma's face. I'm so happy she's here also, because hopefully we've got some questions from audience members. Do we have anything, Emma?
We do have a couple of questions. Goodness me, what an amazing conversation. That was so interesting. I've learned so much. And I feel like we should have booked 2 hours. We'll have to find another time.
Yeah.
Got here, someone says, please do another discussion. Such wonderful group of speakers, thank you. And this has been a brilliant conversation. Everyone should hear it. This conversation is recorded and it will be on our website, so you can go back and watch it again, and also get your mates and friends and spread the word and get people to take a look at it. We have got a couple of questions here. We are running slightly out of time, so I hope if the panelists don't mind, we maybe only answer one of these. But one of the questions is, what can individuals do within their communities to help make change when we're fighting the larger entities? That's question one. And question two is, how can we work together to tackle climate justice when each context is so different? That's a really interesting one as well, in light of the different contexts that our group of panelists are coming from, with you know, with different countries and what's happening in different places and within different communities. So I don't know. Would someone like to tackle the last question? How can we work together to tackle climate justice when each context is so different? I think, Lael, you talked about cultural strategy as really key. And I know with the Paris Agreement, that obviously was really highlighted. And it's actually, you know, how Season for Change has come about in terms of thinking about how artists and the cultural sector can help.
Yeah, I can speak to this briefly because Majid kind of sparked an idea of me of like, everybody has to do something, whether you're a writer, a poet, a worker, like, and so I just want to stay on that, is that I think like thinking on two questions is that the reason why we're in this climate crisis is because there's been a homogenized cultural dominance. So we're all living through a Western perspective, from the clothes we wear to the language we speak to the food that we eat. And in order for us to survive, is we actually need to bring things down to the micro level. I love this idea of a global organizing, because it is going to take global effort for us to survive, y'all. Like all continents coming together, all 7 billion people shifting their perspective around consumption, around what they use, around what they don't use, like what corporations are supporting. Like this is going to take global effort. But in order to make it less overwhelming, is look at your community, look at the local infrastructure, because it is going to require, so if you think about an ecological system, is the biodiversity of that ecological system is what allows it to thrive, from the worms to the tree to the birds, like the poop and everything is what makes it so beautiful when the flowers bloom. We need to look at that in our urban spaces, everything from the migrant communities to the trans communities, to whether there's buildings or cooperatives or community gardens, or whether people are using electric bikes or riding buses. Like we really need to look at things and look at that from everything, rural communities. And so look at the biocultural diversity of our human species as a necessary tool in order for us to survive. And so that requires everything getting more localized. Yes, let's think about it at a global scale, because that is the reality of what we need to survive as a human species. But in order to make it tangible is what is the local issue? Are you fighting for street lamps in your parks because there's a lot of violence? Well, can you actually think about it getting LED lights and with solar panels and buying from a cooperative business or a local provider? So just like thinking about small ways that you can activate around local issues that will help. Is there an abandoned parking lot in your neighborhood that is predominantly migrant and Black and brown? Instead of fighting for it to be sold or just to a developer, how about communities take it over? Look at some of the laws that are in place for you to be able to take that lot and grow some food, some seasonal food that can help reduce the whole community's carbon footprint. I don't like carbon marketing. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a stupid way to talk about the climate crisis, because the problem is racism, the problem is classism, the problem is all these systems of oppression. Climate change is a symptom. So our biggest success out of this is to embrace the human biocultural diversity and to allow ourselves to organize at a micro scale. And so whatever small issues feel at hand for you and your community, do it. Do it powerfully and think about, how can I make this so that it's environmentally friendly? Even if the budget feels restricting, how can I still do it in a way where I feel like I'm doing the best for my community? How can I, instead of really being overwhelmed about the air quality, how can I think about a program where we can start to just track the air quality in particular residential communities, and I can hand out some of these kits. There's so many kits that you can find around this stuff. So I'm gonna leave that there. I think I just said a lot, but I think that's my answer to both questions.
It is. Well, both questions, but both questions are completely related, aren't they? So I think that's right. I think Majid said, we're not asking for our rights, we are basically organising and taking them back, and we can't leave anyone behind. I think, you know, this thing about the individuals within their communities working locally, whilst also, obviously, we do also have to work in a global context as well. It's complicated, but that is how we move forward. I think that we will have to draw a line there because we have happily overrun. I'm very happy about that.
Good, thank goodness. Woo!
Yeah, and I'm so keen to bring you all back. So what I wanted to say first of all is obviously thank you. Different time zones, Lael Camargo, the wonderful chairing by Thimali Kodikara in New York, Richa in Delhi, and Majid in Sheffield with a fire alarm as well at one point. We've had fire alarms. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and you know, please do come back. We have these events every Thursday at 4 p.m. British time, UK time, until the 24th of June. Plus we've got 2 lunchtime workshops on real utopias on the 19th and 20th of May. So would love the audience to come back, would love our panelists to come back and join us for those events as well. So just to say,
yeah, I would like to also thank you, Emma, Salome, and all the folks at Season for Change, Judy's Bicycle, Arts Admin, who've taken such good care of me, but also, you know, for inviting me to host this panel, but to actually curate it as well, because these kinds of opportunities are precisely how we are able to realign the narrative. So I just thank you so much for inviting us as well. It's been wonderful.
That's great to hear. That's really great to hear. Thank you very much. All right then, I think we're going to say goodbye. Panelists, if you want to turn your cameras off, and we will come back and have a little chat afterwards if you want to. So the Season for Change team will be here after the music's faded. Thank you.